What's up guys, it's Ryan here, and welcome to this video where we are going to be testing out the brand new Tier 92 custom fitted masterwork gear. I'm going to start off by talking about the set effect, and then we're going to get into a number of different bosses. The table of contents is in the description down below. First off, let's take a look at the stats. On the left hand side, we've got the Tier 92 custom fitted masterwork gear, and on the right hand side, we have a full set of Tier 90 power gear. That's Ember Keen boots, Razorback gauntlets, and full malevolent. As you can see, the stats aren't immensely different, although there is an increased strength bonus on the Tier 92, and the defensive stats are noticeably better as well. For the duration of this video, the gear was perked with Impatient 3, Biting 3, Crackling 3 mobile, and Enhanced Devoted 3. By default, this gear lasts twice as long as the standard gear you're used to, so it has 200,000 charges in combat. On top of that, it will not degrade at all in Elite dungeons, and it degrades very slowly on Reaper assignments and Slayer tasks. It can be repaired by using a normal, untrimmed set of masterwork on it. This set of armor is the first power armor class of gear that has a set effect, and the set effect is extremely powerful. The majority of this video is going to be testing out this set effect and how it affects many different bosses. Here's what it does. If a player is wearing at least 3 pieces of custom-fitted, trimmed masterwork gear, 10% of the damage you take per piece of equipment worn will be stored in the armor and dealt to the player over the following 6 seconds in the form of typeless damage. On paper, this doesn't seem like a big deal, as you're still taking the same amount of damage, but how it reacts with PVMing makes this gear extremely powerful at a lot of different places. Before we get into the testing, I'm also going to mention that abilities like Resonance that rely on you getting hit a single time will overwrite the set effect. So if you're normally taking a 4,000 damage hit, if you use Resonance on that hit, there won't be a bleed or anything at all. You'll get your regular Resonance. Likewise, the bleed pop-ups from previous hits will not interrupt or steal your reso. You can reso while taking this bleed, and the next time you get hit by a monster, it'll pop your res. Now that we've been over that, let's get right to Telos. To start off with this gear, I thought we'd take things to Telos with a twist. I wanted to see if I could do a 500% enraged Telos kill without properly dodging any mechanics. This was me tanking a so much power into a Gillinor uppercut on 500 enrage on Berserker Aura. And I mean, look, I didn't even eat up for the thing. I'm sitting on 5,000 life points when the so much power flies out at me. I eat a blubber jellyfish and a Brudos, and that's a so much power at 500 enrage. This gear makes it so incredibly difficult to die accidentally, it's almost comical. Especially through the first 4 phases of the fight, there is not a single mechanic that could KO you. Even a rock at 1,000 enrage wouldn't KO you. So as long as you've got food, you could keep going through a potentially infinite amount of mistakes. This is because the overall damage per minute Telos does on you is extremely low, with hints of mass damage through the first 4 phases if you make a mistake. Basically, if you mess up, there's going to be 3 really weak melee auto attacks before the next mechanic, so it gives you enough time to eat up and recover. Masterwork excels for this. But this gear isn't just good for mitigating damage, it's also the best gear in the entire game for dishing it out. What you're watching right now is a 20-second phase 1, which is a heck of a lot faster than I'd be able to do with magic. The Berserk rotation possibilities with this setup are completely ridiculous, and it's even better illustrated on something like P5, where normally you'd be taking a lot of damage and it would be a risky move. With this gear, so long as the enrage is low enough, it's relatively safe to try and clear a phase like this. I was able to replicate this a couple times in a row. You go in on full adren, use Barge on Telos to get up close, you use Berserk right away, it's an Assault, a Destroy, and then a couple leftover basics to finish the entire phase. It's really as easy as that. It's also worth noting that in the clip you just watched, I'm not using a Dragon Battle Axe spec, I'm not using Vulnerability, I'm not using a Grimoire, I'm not using Blubbers. It's a regular casual melee setup, and it's still an absolute ton of damage. Now that we've talked about the good, let's talk about the not so good. Phase 5 is still extremely difficult with melee. When you're using melee, there are no good ways to stun the minions, and if you want to clear the minions all at once, you put yourself in the line of fire. The Masterwork set effect helps a little bit with this, but I still found, especially on the higher enrages, I was taking a lot of damage on Phase 5. I did a number of kills at 250, 300, and 500% enrage, and my final verdict here is still that magic is going to be a better combat style for Telos. If you want something extremely forgiving, the Masterwork is great. If you want something that's a lot of fun for a change, then the Masterwork is great. But if you're trying to get Telos kills and you're trying to learn the boss, I still think magic is superior. As useful as the delayed damage from the Masterwork is, and as great as it is, it just simply doesn't match the extra functionality you get out of using either ranged or magic, both for clearing the large groups of minions and for stunning them to be out of harm's way. So on the whole, if you're planning on doing Telos with melee, this is the setup to use, but magic is still king here. After my time at Telos, I decided to see if I could tank the green hit from Kalphite King in this gear, and interestingly enough, You actually can. Although, there's a caveat to that, which is that it hurts a lot and it also still requires a spirit shield. Over a bunch of attempts at Kalphite King, this is definitely not a viable way to solo. You'd be way better off soloing Kalphite King by simply skipping the green attack or using the other well-known methods. That being said, being able to do Kalphite King in this gear means if you mess up and you're gonna end up tanking a green, you have a way to get out of it. It's more of a last-ditch effort thing than something that you'd want to do every time, as it uses a lot of supplies, but still, it does work. This was the strategy. I'd be wearing 5 pieces of masterwork armor, and whenever I got turned green, I'd make sure my divine spirit shield was on, I had full prayer points, and I also put on a phoenix necklace. The hit would be between 8 and 9,000 damage, and it would also pop the phoenix necklace, as well as a portent of restoration that would get my life points back up and help me in tanking the ensuing 8 or 9,000 damage. This isn't something I see becoming any kind of meta, but it was really cool to do, as that's always been seen as an insta-kill or a one-hit mechanic, and to be able to face tank it like that, it was just a ton of fun. So if you pick up a set of this gear, that's definitely a place to check out. Masterwork interacts really interestingly with onslaught. The damage you take from your onslaught gets dissipated by the masterwork, which means technically, after you end your onslaught, you have time to eat the last couple hits of damage that you've already dealt. This means that technically, I think an 100k damage onslaught on Araxxi is possible, although I found it very difficult to do. I kept getting cleaves, or in the clip you saw there, darkness, or I'd get webbed that would ruin the whole thing. But if you ever do need to onslaught with melee, this makes it a lot safer, and you can normally squeeze out at least 2 extra hits. Even though the onslaught's a good showcase of something that the armor does, at Araxxi, that's not a very practical way to get through the last phase. You're gonna want a Zerk. And as you can see here, I think I botched every single prayer flick, and I somehow didn't die. There were times here where if I did not have Masterwork on, I would have completely gotten one hit from 11,000 life points, and this gear allowed me to tank. If you're planning on learning how to prayer flick in melee distance, the Masterwork gear helps an absolute ton. In the past, if you miss a prayer flick, you could literally take an 8k melee hit. And with this gear, that won't be the case. You'll take a 4k and then you'll know to eat up because the next 4k is coming. For me personally, that's what makes this gear the best. It's the exact same if you accidentally attack on a mirrorback spider. Something that would have in the past completely one-hit you won't do that anymore. Also, if you're wondering, the final kill speed on that was 2 minutes and 42 seconds. Which brings me to my next point. Not only does this gear make it harder to die to anything in the Araxxi fight, it is also the gear with the highest power bonus in the game. If you want to hit like an absolute truck, this is the gear to do it with. What you're watching right now is the fastest Araxxi kill I have ever done. I've done an absolute ton of Araxxi with over 2,500 kill count, and I'm normally sitting comfortably between 2 minutes and 45 seconds and 3 minutes, and this gear helped take things to the next level. This is the exact same rotation I've always done at Rax. I haven't made too many changes to it because it gets me good, consistent kills. And with this gear, it's just even faster than before. The extra damage bonus, coupled with not needing to worry as much about mirrorback spiders and web shields, allowed me to bust out that little bit of extra DPS that was needed to get a PR. And as you can see, that's a personal record with me getting webbed right at the end of P3. Without that, this kill could have been in the 220s. Heading into phase 4, I was actually really upset with myself because I thought I'd thrown the kill by getting webbed at the end there. But with the rotation I'm doing, I saved my adrenaline potion for the last phase, and because of that, my Zerk was able to absolutely carry me the rest of the way. This is my Araxxi in real time, and the hits are just ridiculous, and the damage I'm taking is extremely low, which allows me to keep DPSing. And as the phase ends there, you'll see I got myself a 238, which is the fastest kill I've ever done. Trimmed Masterwork gear is the best possible gear you could bring to Rax. If you want faster kills or more consistent kills, this is a great piece of gear to bring, and I could not recommend it enough. On the note of consistency, in past videos, people have thought that I've cherry-picked clips that look particularly good or interesting or amazing, and although I am going to highlight the things that are most useful, when I say something is consistently good, this is what I mean. This was 3 Araxxis in a row, with no Grimoire, no Dragon Battle Axe spec, and as you can see, it's almost the exact same time every time. Obviously, this armor isn't going to guarantee that you have 13-second Araxxi phases. It comes down to your rotation a lot too, but this armor facilitated learning rotations like this, because on the times that I've messed up prayer flicks or anything else, the set effect comes in clutch and makes sure that you don't lose out on the kill. This makes working on your rotations and improving your overall kill times extremely easy, and for someone who's trying to get better at PVMing, this is a really good gear set to buy. It makes anything you do a little more forgiving, which incentivizes taking risks and getting better. Next up, we take things to Solak. Most of the time when you go to Solak, both members of the team bring both melee and magic gear, and they alternate using Berserk and using Sunshine. And this normally works out extremely well with all the DPS checks, and you end up getting smooth, efficient kills. By the way, Solak guide coming soon. The only real downsides to a hybrid setup are you have a lot of gear in your invent, so you don't have space for a lot of food, and it's also pretty sweaty. You've got way more switches than you normally have, and it can get complicated real quick, especially when you're learning a boss. So when I geared up in a melee-only setup for Solak, I got some weird looks at first, but it actually worked out quite well, and this is without a doubt a feasible way to do Solak. If melee is the only combat style you know, or it's the combat style you're best geared in, you can most definitely get it done. Now, it is worth noting that if you're the Realm tank on Phase 4, I would not recommend being a meleeer for that. So it'd be very difficult for both people on the team to camp melee, but for one of the two people, it works out just fine. What you're watching right now is a Phase 1 where we actually get it to Phase HP instantly in one go, which is a pretty tough DPS check that can be quite difficult to make. Even though melee is seen as better for burst damage, the sustained DPS you can deal is more than good enough for something like Solak. Now, I'm also going to turn your attention over to my invent at the start of this kill. This was more than enough food for the entire kill, and it allowed me to bring a ton of summoning flasks that I could feed my Steel Titan and have it speccing constantly the entire fight. This amount of summoning flasks may be seen as overkill, but I was able to do it safely and easily without worrying about the food. On top of this, had I brought a Scrimshaw of Vampirism, I don't think I would have needed any food at all. So if you're looking to cut down on food usage, this isn't a bad way to go. There weren't too many situations at Solak where the Masterwork saved my life, because you generally don't take that much damage, but if you were to make a mistake on Phase 2 for the Storm, or on Phase 4 for the Blight attack, you'd end up completely fine in this gear. So it's pretty much the same as Malevolent, with slightly higher defense bonuses, slightly higher damage bonus, and way more forgiving if you make a mistake. I think the trend we're seeing through this video is if you're trying to learn a new boss or try and do something out of your comfort zone, this gear is a really good option. It's forgiving, and especially if you're fed up of dying repeatedly, this would be a good way to break that habit. Next up, Beastmaster. Melee Beastmaster isn't particularly advisable as you take a lot more damage, but the Masterwork armor set effect makes it a lot more manageable. The damage output is extremely high with melee, and the set effect reducing the size of the hits you take makes it a lot safer to do things like zerking and soul split flicking. This allowed for really strong damage output, and although I still wouldn't recommend meleeing Beastmaster, it definitely worked. I'm gonna slow this clip down. I tried to base Beastmaster with melee and with this gear. Melee basing is extremely tough, as while the backup Vokes and you're clearing your stacks, you're still going to be taking damage from Beastmaster. And you're going to see in this clip, I got a defensive reset, and then afterwards I got hit by Beastmaster twice, both hits for about 3,500 damage. Normally, that would be 14,000 damage instantly over 2 hits. And instead, it was a cool 7,000 damage, the bleed was applied, and then I used Barricade to clear the rest of the damage from the bleed. You're going to see similar situations and applications throughout this video, and that's one of the strongest points of this gear. If you have a ton of bleed damage amassed, you can Barricade later on and still mitigate the damage. Now, it's worth noting that this effect does not apply to things like Debilitate and Reflect, so you can't debilitate a hit after you've already tanked it, but for Barricade, it will block all damage, including the bleed. In this instance, I've got thousands of damage stored up in the armor, and I make it all go away by cading. Without a doubt, the Masterwork gear saved my life, and had I been in any other armor in the game, I would have died here. And you can actually see that damage dissipating if we hover over my debuff bar. The number on the top is the amount of damage I'm going to be hit each time the bleed hits me, and the number on the bottom is the total amount of damage owed. And you can see that while I'm cated, this number decreases without me taking any damage. At Yaka, the first thing I had to do was try basing with melee, and I was extremely impressed with how this went. Normally, I'd be basing in Acto, and you take a lot of damage, but you get a lot of HP back through Acto resets. As strong as Acto is, my preference from this point forward is going to be to base Yakamaru with the Masterwork gear, and here's why. The biggest problem with basing Yakamaru with melee is when you're running towards the pool, it's really hard to tell if you're going to get a ranged hit or a magic hit, and sometimes you'll just end up missing it. If you get hit by the attack style that you're not praying against, you can literally get one hit from full HP, which makes melee basing tough and inconsistent. This also applies to soul split flicking. If you've got 15 drench stacks and you miss a single soul split flick when you're basing Yaka, it's gonna one hit you from full HP. And for that reason, I traditionally wouldn't soul split flick much, if at all. This gear fixes that problem, because with 5 pieces on, every hit you're taking is halved. This means that if you miss a soul split flick, instead of being hit 10,000 damage outright, you'll take a 5k hit, and then you'll take the next 5k damage over the next 6 seconds. It gives you an opportunity to eat and not even come close to getting KO'd. If you watch the clip that's been playing in the background, you'll notice that throughout this entire sequence, I have not eaten a single piece of food. And not only that, I've only put my shield on for resonance, no other defensive camping, and I've actually been going through a pretty decent DPS rotation. And instead of relying on defensives to stay alive, I'm actually DPSing with a scrimshot of Vampirism and Soul Split Flicks, and that's all I need to stay alive without using any food. It's a strategy I wouldn't be comfortable doing with any other gear than this, and that in my opinion is what makes the Masterwork gear so powerful. Now we're going to look at when I made a big mistake. As you can see, I've got a jellyfish on me as well as Yakamaru, and I'm handling it decently well until the point that the tendril comes out. And normally when this tendril comes out, it hits you 2,000 damage per tick. It would have completely finished me off, but because I had the Masterwork, I was able to move out of the way from the tendril and eat up to take care of the damage after the fact. This gear also works out wonderfully as the North tank. When you North tank with melee, the general rotation is to go through a big berserk to try and get the pool as close to closed as you possibly can. This speeds up the kill a lot, as whenever all the other pools are down, people can just come up to the pool, they don't need to DPS much, and it's time to close it up. Some people might not know this, but melee North tanking is actually my favorite role at Yaka, and it's the role I take whenever I possibly can. This is a role I've done over 150 times, and I'm really well used to the amount of damage you take when you're berserked while tanking the pool. And with the Masterwork set effect, the amount of burst damage you're taking is significantly lower, which makes this role a whole lot easier and a lot more accessible too. We get the pool down and we finish the kill. There's not a whole lot to say about the standard mode bosses at God Wars 2, as there really isn't that much opportunity to get KO'd, so it's going to perform very similarly to something like Malevolent. But this does change in one instance, which is Challenge Mode Hellwar. At Challenge Mode Hellwar, the You Will Bleed attack hits approximately 10,000 damage, and the mushrooms hit about 7,000 each, and you can get caught in multiple at a time. So on paper, this is one of the least forgiving bosses in the entire game, and I've done about 50-60 kill count here, and I can attest to the fact that it is extremely frustrating at times. Its phasing is completely messed up. Sometimes you'll surge across and he'll start layering mechanics on top of each other, and it can be very difficult to get consistent easy kills unless you're 100% focused. And my experience with this gear was a couple personal records, a couple tanked You Will Bleed attacks that didn't kill me, and a couple mushrooms to the face as well that also didn't kill me. I've got about 40 or 50 more kills to go for the 100 kill count at Challenge Mode Hellwar Insane Final Boss requirement, and this is the setup and this is the gear I'll be doing it in. Melee has always been the worst combat style by far for Elite Dungeon 1. It makes navigating the first boss difficult, it makes the spin attack on the second boss a problem, and don't even get me started about Seiryu, where the shadow spots give you about a second to react before completely one-hitting you. I tried this out because my Twitch chat wanted to see me try, and I didn't expect it to go well at all. And after one single practice run, I was able to do the entirety of Matsuta without using a single food. Once you've taken the time to work on your strategies just a little bit, melee is extremely powerful for Elite Dungeon 1, and it's actually now my favorite combat style to use here. You get a wide variety of AoE attacks for clearing the mobs outside with the Noxious Scythe, you get the Zara's Godsword special to give you increased damage, whether that's on mobs or on bosses, and you also get the Scrimshot of Vampirism, that allows you to get a ton of extra life points back, no problem at all. The other thing that is extremely underrated is having the mobility of Barge, Bladed Dive, and Surge all together to get to the Water Sprouts. The Water Sprouts will only give you a 5% damage reduction if you kill them in melee distance. If you don't get hit by that wave, you don't get the damage reduction on the magic hit on the second phase. Being able to Barge and Bladed Dive onto the waters guarantees that you get that damage reduction, and it makes clearing them and staying ahead of the spawns very, very easy. There were a couple issues I ran into. For example, at Matsuta, when you're in melee distance, the magic attack hits you before Matsuta even jumps. So you need to be able to predict when it's coming. It's very simple and it just involves counting. So the first time I tried it, I got hit by a lot of magic attacks, but the second time in, I didn't run into any issues. Matsuta is a boss a lot of people struggle with, and if you struggle with it, I would strongly suggest bringing melee gear and giving it a shot. Like I mentioned before, my first run at Elite Dungeon 1 with melee was a little bit rough, as the strategies I'd been used to using didn't really work quite the same way as before. But there were times when I was hit with absolutely massive amounts of damage, and I was somehow still able to tank them. This is a perfect example of the armor completely saving my life when learning something new. Once I worked out all the kinks, I was able to finish off the first boss with no food as well. Now we're going to take things to Seiryu. Seiryu was also very different with melee. There were a lot of new strategies I uncovered over time, including things like the massive fire breath attack that it's an 8k will not hit you at all if you run to the south side of the arena. This meant that when I had resonance up, I could stand back and get up to full life points, and when I didn't have resonance up, I didn't need to waste time using a defensive or take any damage. All I had to do was move forward, and I wouldn't get hit. I also found that you can melee Seryu's head without being directly on the south part of the platform. This is extremely helpful as there are shadow spots that come off from the ground, and you don't want them hitting you. It's also worth noting you could go an additional square back if you needed to with a scythe, so if your ping was high or your reaction time wasn't what it needed to be, that would also be a viable option. With those couple things worked out, it was actually quite straightforward. There was no situation where I wouldn't be able to melee, as any configuration of the shadow hands would leave an opening at least large enough for me to melee, and that's without my scythe. Now I'm going to talk about once I hit the phase HP and it was time to climb up. The general strategy I'm going with is a safe 3 cycles. I'm going to berserk the first crystal and finish it off before the blobs go in and heal it. The blobs can't bring the crystals back up from the dead, so the blobs are going to use all of their healing on the second crystal that's already full HP. Once the blobs are done healing it, you just need to do a little bit of damage to it, and that's going to make your cycle even easier. When you go up the second time, you're going to finish off the second crystal, wait for the blobs to heal the third crystal that doesn't have any HP missing, and then after that, you'll do a tiny bit of damage to the third crystal. Once you hit phase HP for the third time, you just need to go up, finish off the third crystal, and you're good to go. This isn't the fastest strategy of all time, but it's the strategy I prefer because it's very safe and consistent as well. It's good if you don't like to make things too complicated. Overall, I was extremely surprised with how much this armor changed the feel of Elite Dungeon 1 with melee. It took something truly unforgiving and terrible and transformed it into something that was not only functional, but actually quite enjoyable. I would strongly recommend trying out melee Elite Dungeons 1 with the masterwork gear. The 110 ancient scale drop probably didn't hurt the review either. Now, we're going to take things to Elite Dungeon 2. So in our first Elite Dungeon 2 run, we were trioing, and it wasn't a good showcase of the armor as we cleared the boss way too quickly to even really see anything. I think the thing was dead within 15 seconds, so I went back in a duo, and as you can see, this gear is putting in work. The damage I was taking was so low, I was able to focus on my Zerk rotation without getting brewed down, and in a duo, we were able to insta-clear the boss. You'll also see that even while I'm Zerked, I'm able to do some soul slit flicks, and that's a situation where if I were to miss a soul slit flick, I knew I'd be completely safe as the gear would minimize the hit enough that I'd be able to tank it. I've done about 30 runs with melee, and I don't normally soul slit flick this boss, as if you're Zerked, you could take a 6 or a 7k magic hit and end up hitting the deck instantly. As soon as you take away the risk of dying, soul slit flicking becomes worthwhile, and it makes the boss fight a whole lot faster and a lot easier too. Like I said earlier, I've done a lot of Elite Dungeon 2 runs with melee, and the one thing that frustrates me a lot, especially with the second and third bosses, is you don't know when you're in melee distance and when you aren't. Sometimes the boss will be far away from you, and it'll kind of rubber band around and then hit you. The position vectors are sometimes way off, and that combined with a Zerk can get you literally one hit. It's happened to me numerous times, and it's always really frustrating, because you'll see the boss in one location, but its actual position will be different as it's stalled in an animation. It's something I personally think Jagex really needs to look at, as even though the boss's movements are great and they're fantastic, it diminishes your ability to actually go through the boss fight safely and properly. That being said, as this rubber banding is a part of the game, sometimes you're going to take melee hits when you don't think you're in melee distance, and it can be really painful. This gear pretty well guarantees that you're going to survive any amount of damage you're taking, and so long as you've got the food, you don't need to worry nearly as much about it. I was able to focus on my DPS, and I was able to get a pretty decent kill speed without working too hard. If this boss didn't rubber band around, the trimmed masterwork gear wouldn't be the most important thing, but while that is a problem in the game, it's definitely nice to have, and it's something that might make me reconsider my vow to never melee Elite Dungeons ever again. It's also worth noting that while you're in Elite Dungeons, the custom-fitted masterwork gear will not degrade at all. Doesn't matter what you're attacking in the dungeons, it will stay at full charges, so it's a really good high-value thing to bring. The Blackstone Dragon is very similar. The real trick with this gear is the shadows. The only thing in these Elite Dungeon boss fights that can really put you in death's office are the shadow mechanics, and sometimes you'll only be standing in it for a second or two, and that's enough to take away all your life points. In this gear, it buys you a little bit extra time, so especially when learning, if you want to go in with melee, this would be the gear to bring. It would help a lot, especially if you're someone who doesn't like dying. That being said, with practice, and once you're at the point where you're not standing in the shadows at all, this gear doesn't make a huge difference. Your strategy remains very similar, and the boss fight goes as smoothly as you could expect it to go. Overall, I found this gear more powerful in Elite Dungeons 1 than in Elite Dungeons 2, as Elite Dungeons 1 is just a lot more challenging, especially with melee. The mechanics are a lot more unforgiving, and it really gives the set effect an opportunity to shine. Regardless of which Elite Dungeons you're going to be doing, this gear is going to help you out. But personally for me, I'm going to stick to meleeing Elite Dungeon 1, and I'm going to be doing Elite Dungeon 2 with magic. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Why is Ryan testing out tier 92 armor at the Queen Black Dragon? It's an irrelevant boss, and not only that, but the drops recently got nerfed as well with the mining and smithing rework. Well, I know, and I feel the exact same way. I don't think Queen Black Dragon is the boss most people are buying this gear to try out, but I think it showcases this gear better than a lot of other bosses in the game. Let's talk about it. I accidentally forgot my antifire and all of my food in the bank as well. And now that things are interesting, I'm going to explain why I did this and what it shows about the masterwork gear. For starters, I was able to do 10 kills in a row with no food and no antifire, and after the 10 kills, I had the same amount of life points I had when I first came in. I was full life points. This doesn't make me a masterful dragon slayer. The point I'm making here requires us to look at how Queen Black Dragon works. When you're not anti-fired, the amount of damage you can take is extremely high, but it's not sustained. Over the course of the whole boss fight, there's a chance that you get a firewall here and there, and there's also a chance that you get the hot flames attack. Those are both situations where you're going to take a lot of damage over a short period of time, but the rest of the boss fight, you're not being hit hard at all. Had I been in any other armor, the combination of firewalls and hot flames and tortured souls would have finished me off early on, and I wouldn't have made it past the 3rd or 4th kill. But with this masterwork gear, there weren't even very many close calls, as instead of taking that big 10k hit that KO'd me, I would take 5,000 damage, and then over the next 6 seconds, I had the opportunity to soul spit back all the damage I'd already taken. At bosses like the Queen Black Dragon, and in a lot of ways phases 1 to 4 Telos, this armor is extremely powerful, and this is where the set effect really shines. Obviously, no one's going to be going to QBD with no anti-fire and no food, but hey, if you were to do it, you'd have a pretty easy time. And I think the showcase of what the set effect really does is very useful, because on paper, you could say, well, you're still taking the same amount of damage overall. It's no different than if you'd been in any other gear, but at a lot of bosses like this one, and in the situation that I created for myself, this gear was able to work its magic. And another boss with some similar results was the Corp Beast. At this boss, I tried out the same thing. I was soul splitting, I was sitting there, and I was not losing a lot of HP. You'd still need a little bit of food. I don't think you could fully AFK kills here in this setup, but you can go a lot of kills in a row without needing to bank, if at all. Especially if you're planning on learning bosses, this gear is going to make it really hard to mess up. It's that time of the video where I give you guys my final thoughts, and as you can probably guess, I'm going to strongly recommend the trimmed, custom-fitted masterwork gear. Not only will it last a very long time doing Slayer and Reaper assignments and last forever in Elite dungeons, but even if it didn't do that, this would be the most powerful gear in the entire game. If you're someone who doesn't like to die, or someone who's trying to get better and more ambitious with their rotations, this gear is perfect for you. If you're someone who's trying to transition from Revolution into full manual, this gear is perfect for you, and if you're someone who wants to do the most damage possible, this gear is also perfect for you. It's extremely powerful gear, and for me personally, it's the set of gear I'm going to be doing absolutely everything with from this point forward. So anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I experimented a lot more with masks and different stuff than I normally do, so let me know what you liked and what you didn't. Outside of that, I hope everyone's doing well. I will see you guys in 2 days for a brand new Iron Man challenge, and that's all for me. Have a good one, and peace out.